welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Daniel Barkowitz, and I am Assistant Vice President of Financial Assistance and Student Employment at the University of Miami. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today as we begin our review of the FAFSA and our FAFSA outreach project that we're inviting you all to be a part of. I want to say thank you for joining us and give you a couple of pieces of logistics as we get started, and then introduce myself and our background and our panelists and jump right in because we know time is important, and dare I say time is money. Some of you will get that joke because we've been listening to money songs together. So our goal is today is to really educate you about the FAFSA and how to help students complete the FAFSA. And we actually have some money for you if you partner with us. We want to help our students get the money they deserve, but also reward you with a compensation as well. So this program is being sponsored by Broward Educational Foundation and Bridge to Life, which is the Broward Community's college access network. This is a national campaign that's being supported by money from the federal government, funded through ECMC, and we're thrilled to have you here with us today. Again, my name is Daniel Barkowitz. My background is I've worked in college financial aid for over 35 years. I've worked at very large public institutions. I was Assistant Vice President of Financial Aid at Valencia College, which is in the state of Florida, is one of our 2-year public colleges with 4-year programs as well. I was also director of financial aid at MIT in Cambridge. I was served as dean of financial aid at Columbia University. As I said, I've worked for about 35 years in the field of higher education finance. So today, although my employer is University of Miami, today I'm really not representing University of Miami. I'm representing the financial aid profession in general as we talk about the challenges we face this year and invite you to help us help our students, collectively our students, to achieve and reach college success that they are dreaming of and hoping for. So that is my background. Also on the background with us, or with us in virtual mode today, are a number of financial aid experts and colleagues of mine who are serving as subject matter experts behind the scenes. So as we go through today, if you have questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box. We will be monitoring those questions, and our staff is available to answer those questions if you have them as we go through. The chat box you can feel free to type into, but that will not go anywhere but among us. We will not answer questions in the chat box. Although I'd love, as we get started, if you wouldn't mind letting us know in the chat box, where are you from? Are you calling in today from Florida? Are you from out of state? What city in Florida are you in? So feel free to type a chat message into the chat box, letting us know where you are dialing in from, or I guess dialing in is an old term, where you're logging in from today. That would be great. And again, what city as well as state. So my goal today, as I said, and thank you all for putting some information in there. Seeing a lot of Florida, Miramar, Weston, Tampa, Jasper, let's see, Pembroke Pines. That's great. So thank you again for giving us that information. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of what is the FAFSA, give you some background, talk about the challenges we faced. We are recording this session, so please feel free to just sit back and participate. You don't necessarily need to take notes or screenshots. Before the session's done today, I'll tell you how to access the recording as well as a copy of the PowerPoint I'm going to be sharing with you so you can come back and look at it on your own at some later point. Welcome to folks from Tennessee as well. We see you and we're glad you're joining us today. So I also will share with you, my goal is that this session will be done pretty promptly at 3:15. It's about an hour and 10 minutes that we have to cover together. We'll stay on to answer your questions after that, but be prepared. We should finish in about an hour 15. I know we booked out for 2 hours, but that was just to make sure you had the time available. So let me talk about what are we going to talk about. So we're going to do a quick intro and introduction and review. What is the FAFSA? Why does FAFSA completion matter? Why it isn't too late, because it may feel like it's too late given what's going on this year. We'll talk a little bit about the FAFSA fiasco of 2024. I'll share a little bit about what went wrong and why we are where we are at this point in the year, and help you understand how you can be part of the solution to the problem we've faced. So to begin with, FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And again, the key word of that is free. The FAFSA is free. No one charges or should charge for helping you to complete the FAFSA or helping our students to complete the FAFSA. It is a free application. And it is, by and large, the single greatest co-attribute, coefficient for likelihood to attend college. As you can see from the first bullet on the slide, seniors in high school who complete their FAFSAs are 84% more likely to immediately enroll in college. It's one of the reasons, and again, I see you in Tennessee, it's one of the reasons Tennessee actually has a mandatory FAFSA requirement for students graduating from high school. We do not have that in Florida, although I know it's something we've talked about at the legislature, but it is really a good indicator of someone's ability to go to college because it opens up their financial prospects. And every year, a number of funds, or a lot of funds, are provided to students who complete the FAFSA. In 21-22, it was nearly $177 billion. And you can see in the pie chart here how that money was awarded. So when you apply for the FAFSA, you don't just apply for federal funds, you also apply for state funds in your state, and you also apply for institutional funds. And there are two common misconceptions that families have about the FAFSA. The first is that the single greatest amount of money comes from loans. And if you look at the pie chart, what you can see is, in fact, only about a third of the money that's available nationwide is available in the form of loans. 60%, double that, almost double that, is in grants and scholarships, 5% in tax benefits, and 1% in work awards. And just to back up, the single largest source of grants is actually from institutions themselves, from colleges and universities themselves. They provide a lot of funding for their students. And the way you get access to that funding, in part, is by applying using the FAFSA. If you don't apply with the FAFSA, we don't know that you need support, and we won't know to provide you support. So again, students are encouraged to get their FAFSA done. So what is the normal cycle in a normal year? Actually, one more thing, sorry, before I turn there. The other thing that families often misunderstand is they think they earn too much money to qualify, right? So I hear this a lot of times, I'm not poor enough to qualify for financial aid. Well, the reality is, depending upon the cost of the institution, families with significant incomes might qualify for significant financial aid. Well, it's true that at a public low-cost institution, a student earning or a family earning, in the mid five figures or nearly maybe 100,000 wouldn't qualify, but that is not necessarily true at a higher cost institution. So families, if they think they need help paying for college, should apply using the FAFSA. Now, in a normal year, our application cycle would have started on October 1st. So in the senior year of high school, the FAFSA application opens October 1. A student can log in and complete their FAFSA, send it on its way, and complete other applications too. So another application you may have heard of is the CSS profile. That's an application required by higher cost institutions. Sometimes colleges have their own applications for financial aid that they may require. But normally, in a normal year, that would have started on October 1, last October, for this year's graduating or graduated senior class. And in a normal year, those aid offers would have come with the admissions offer. So when a student got an offer for admittance, at that point, there would have been an aid offer accompanying it. Well, this was not a normal year. And I want to talk to you about the FAFSA fiasco of 2024. And the reason it's important to understand this is because this is why this project we're doing exists today. It's because of what happened with the FAFSA over the last year. So there was a rewrite of the entire financial aid system. This came about because of two laws passed by Congress, the FAFSA Simplification Act of 2020 and the Future Act of 2019. Those two laws required a complete reprogramming of the entire FAFSA system from beginning to end, and it meant that the Department of Education had to really start from scratch. Originally, Congress wanted this to begin with students enrolling in college in the 23-24 academic year, but the Department of Education ran out of time and asked for a one-year extension. And so this year's senior class, who are enrolling in college now, for the 24-25 year are the first students to see this new FAFSA. And there have been a number of problems with the rollout of this new FAFSA. I will say, ultimately, we are hopeful the new FAFSA will make the process easier and streamlined for families. They don't have to enter tax information directly anymore. It should connect directly to the IRS. It's a much easier and simpler form. But this year has not been easy or simple. These are just some of the issues that parents and students have faced this year. First of all, remember I said the FAFSA usually opens October 1. This year it opened December 30th, kind of. So December 30th, it was open for an hour. You had to be lucky enough to be in there during that hour. On December 31st, it was open for 2 hours. By about the second week of January, they had it open, but that was already 3 months behind where it would have launched in a normal year. That said, even though the public facing part of FAFSA was built and students and parents could complete a FAFSA, no information was shared with the schools until mid-March. So again, typically in a typical year, as soon as you do a FAFSA, we get your information at the school. It took the Department of Education until mid-March to start releasing that information to schools. And we found there were errors in the information that was sent to us, errors in the formula, errors in the information, etc. And there were also poorly written questions on the FAFSA, which we will look at as we look at the FAFSA together today. In addition, corrections weren't turned on until mid-April, so you can see there are a number of issues that have been problematic for schools, and they keep on going this year. So what we found is nationwide that FAFSA completions among graduating high school seniors are much lower this year than they were last year. And to orient you, these data come from NCAN, the National College Attainment Network. And you can see on the left slide here, the orange line is last year's graduating class, the class of 2023, and the percentage who had done a FAFSA by that date. The lower line, the blue line, is this year's class, graduating class of 2024. Now, you can see since March, we've closed the gap, right? In March, it was a significant gap. We're now closing the gap, but it's still not equal. And college is literally around the corner. So through July 5th, only about 46% of high school graduating seniors have completed their FAFSA. And that represents an 11.2% loss over last year. So the government decided they needed to do something about it. And we in Florida decided that we needed to be a national leader in this because of the data I'm about to show you now. And so here we go. So this shows you by state how states are doing. And for those of you in Tennessee who are in with us today, congratulations. You are literally number one on the list of the top 50 states. You've had the highest participation rate among your graduating seniors. You have to go way down to the bottom of the list to find Florida. We are 48th at 35.3%. So only about a third of our graduating seniors have completed a FAFSA to date. We would want that to be much closer to the national average of at least half, if not greater than half, and we're only at about a third. And Terry makes a great comment in the chat. She still says, and she's true, that's still sad for a graduation requirement for Tennessee. That is right. Tennessee has an opt-out option. So your parents can sign a form and opt you out of it, but you are right. It's still not a great percentage, even though they're leading the country. You can also see on the right side that we are compared to last year, we're about 12% lower than we would have been at this point last year in terms of numbers of completions. That said, we were as bad as number 48 or 49 on this list when we started this project. So you can see we're making progress. So what do we do about it? A couple of things to note. Number one, it is not too late to apply for financial aid for the fall. So I know many folks might think, well, it's the summer already. It's too late to get started. It is not too late to get started. There's still time to complete a FAFSA. Number two, it's not too late to apply for fall admission, especially to our wonderful community colleges and state colleges around the country. Many community colleges have open access, which means as long as you graduated high school, you can begin. So it's not too late to get your application in if you're a student or you're advising a student to start for the fall semester. It's still the chance. Now is when we are running close to the end of the cycle, but it's not too late. It is also not too late to apply for admission for spring. A number of colleges have spring admit cycles. So if a student has said, well, I'm just going to give up on fall, it's too complicated at this point, spring is an option for them. And enrolled already, but just gave up on applying for financial aid, they can still complete the FAFSA and qualify for financial aid for this year. So today we are going to talk about the advisor training. I want to highlight for you that, and again, we'll talk at the end about how do you document this. But our original idea here was that for every 10 FAFSA applications that you helped get students to complete, you would receive a $500 stipend for every group of 10 students, however many groups you wanted. If you could do 20 students, that would be $1,000, 30 students, $1,500, etc. What we've decided to do to make this easier for you, rather than do it by groups of 10, we're going to do it by groups of 5. So for every 5 students, you'll get $250. So you don't have to wait until you reach 10. You can submit for every group of 5 students. Today is our last advisor training. You're the last group to be trained. We started this about a month ago on June 20th. But I will say there is one more event that we are planning to do virtually, and that is an August 6th event where families and students can log on and learn how to do their FAFSA. If they log on and complete a FAFSA, the student or family who does one can receive a $20 Amazon gift card. So if you have families that you're supporting and you want to encourage them, the website is familyfafsa.com. They can log in and register for that Tuesday, August 6th webinar as well. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to actually begin by walking you through the FAFSA. And while we're going to look at a number of questions, we're not going to go through every single slide in the PowerPoint that I'm going to share with you, because the PowerPoint has 312 slides. So if we did do that, we would be here literally for the rest of the day. So what we're going to do instead is I'm going to focus on the most common situation, which is where a student is applying and their parent is applying with them. But what I'm guaranteeing you is that these 312 slides are available to you. If you want to look at some of the rest of this information, if there's other information you want to review with screenshots, it is there for you and you can take a look at it. But we're going to go through the main or most common situation, which is a student applying with a parent or parents. So these pages are going to give you a list of screenshots that will show you how a student or parent would interact with the FAFSA. Those screenshots are samples, but they look very much like the page you're going to see when you log into the web page. And as I said, the FAFSA became open in December of 2023. A couple of things. First of all, to secure a FAFSA, a student has to get an FSA ID, which is a combination of an account name or a username and a password. A student has to have an FSA ID, and at least one parent has to have an FSA ID. That FSA ID will allow you to log into the web page and request a linkage to the IRS information. So 3 to 5 days before someone logs in to complete their FAFSA, they need to go in and request and create their FSA ID. That process looks something like this, and I can show you. You will go to the FSA page and click on Create Account. And once you click on Create Account, that will open up a page that will just basically ask you to go through the process to have your social security number, if you have it, your own email address, name, date of birth, etc. And that will be important that the student creates one, as I said, and that at least one parent creates that FSA ID. Why it has to be 3 days before doing a FAFSA is because once you create the FSA ID, it's then going to link to all the databases with the federal government, confirm your identity, confirm that you are the person you say you are, so that you can, when you complete your actual FAFSA, pull your IRS data in automatically. Now, FAFSA is what's called a roles-based form. What that means is that if you've worked with FAFSA in the past, this is a big change from last year. Basically, whoever's logging into the FAFSA will see only the questions that pertain to them. So when a student logs in, they will see the student questions. When a parent logs in, they will see the parent questions. So it is based on the role that you are playing. In the past, when you logged in, you could see all the questions, but this has now been segmented into a roles-based application. The other thing that's important to make sure that we define is the concept of contributor. So usually when you hear the word contributor, you probably think that's a financial term, right? In most cases, contributor means someone who gives money. In this case, we're not talking about money, we're talking about information. So for the FAFSA purpose, someone who's defined as a contributor is someone who's providing information on the form. That's always going to be the student, because the student is going to have to contribute information to their own form. But it could be a parent or parents. It could be a student's spouse if a student is married. And that is someone who's going to provide information. They have to contribute so that it can match against their IRS record. And we'll talk about that as we go. But the contributor will have their own login separate from the student login. Okay, so you're gonna see basically again how this works. It talks about how information will be automatically brought over from the IRS. And important to know that if you're a dependent student, and we'll define what that means when we go through this, if you're a dependent student or you're helping a dependent student, you have to submit an invitation to have your parent participate on the form if it's required. And we'll show you how that looks as we go through. Okay, so let's walk through how a student would complete a FAFSA. First of all, when they go to that page, studentaid.gov, which I showed you before, they're going to click on FAFSA form, create a new FAFSA. And when they log in, they'll see here, or then when they select that, they'll see here 2425 FAFSA form, start a new form. When they click the button, start a new form, that will begin the FAFSA process for them. If they've already completed a FAFSA and they want to correct something, they can click Access Existing Form. But in most cases, you're going to be working with someone who is brand new starting the FAFSA for the first time. So they're going to click Start a New Form. Once they do, they'll be taken to the login page. Now, this login is that FSA ID. So again, it's the combination of a username or an email address or a phone number and a password. Remember, the student has to have one and the parent has to have one. Really important, student and parent cannot have the same email address. They each have to have a separate email address so that each FSA ID is tied to a separate email address. If they forgot and haven't created one yet, if they click on create an account right here, that will bring them to the screen I showed you before, where you can go ahead and create your FSA ID. Once you log in, and in our case, we're going to be doing this form as the student Raya Trans. You can see it says, welcome Raya. But once you log in, you have to select who are you? Are you a student? Are you a parent? This is that roles-based concept I talked about before. So Raya is going to select that she is the student and click continue. Now, the next 4 screens are going to be videos from the Department of Education that walk through what is a FAFSA, how does it work, etc. And you'll see on each page, the videos here gives you a little description of what it is, but it's optional to watch the video. This first screen is about what is a FAFSA, why is it important. The next video talks about who's a contributor and how do you invite them and what information you might need when you complete the form. The third video tells you what to expect and how long the application process is expected to take. And I will say, although they give you an hour, it should not and will not take an hour. Most families that I've talked to, it's been a 15 to 20-minute process. I did my FAFSA in 10 minutes. Of course, I've worked in the field for a very long time, but it really is a very quick process when it works. And I'll, again, highlight for you the things to watch out for to make sure it works for you and for your students. And then the last video tells you what happens after you're done submitting the form. So after you've submitted it, what happens to the form? What process does it go through? Where does it get sent? How will the school receive it? So now we're going to step into the form itself. And again, remember, we logged in as Raya Tran. Now, a couple of things. Right now, we are on the student side of this experience. Remember that the student's going to do their section, then the parent's going to do their section. When we go through this, you will see that much of what a student sees is going to be mirrored on the parent side. So when a parent logs in, they're going to see a lot of the same screens. So as we review this today, we'll spend a little more time on the student side, but I'll point out things to watch out for if you're a parent filling that section of the form as well, because the questions really look almost identical. There's some small differences, and frankly, the parent section is much shorter than the student section. So you'll see this as we go through. But the very first thing the student's going to see, and the parent too, will be a recap of who they are. And if something's changed, like maybe they've changed addresses, they've moved, their phone number is different, they changed email, they can change that under their account settings. But this is just confirming who they are and who they say they are. The very first question they can provide an answer to is a student state of legal residence. And this is one that already gets students confused right here, right as we start. So basically, this is the state the student is living in and when they became a resident of that state. So students get confused because they've always been a resident of the state. So maybe they were born and have lived in their state of residence forever from their date of birth. If that is true, all they put in there is the month and year of their birth. If they moved to their state, so let's say they were born in Massachusetts but moved to Florida, they would put the date, month, and year, really only month and year, but the month and year that they moved to Florida. Where it gets complicated for parents is parents often wonder, well, we moved at different times. Which one of us should we use? And in that situation, you would use the date, the older date, the farthest away date from today. What's really important, and you might ask, why does this matter? What's really important is that you at least have lived in the state long enough for the state to qualify you for in-state tuition or for their state financial aid. And that requirement is going to vary state by state. I know in Florida, for example, it is 1 year before you begin attendance at a Florida school. You have to have moved to Florida at least 1 year before. So if you're beginning attendance in August of 2024, as long as the month and year is August of 2023 or earlier, you're fine. Different states have different requirements. I've heard of some states having a 3 year or a 5 year requirement. It doesn't really matter as long as you are past that 3 or 5 years. It shouldn't be an issue. But again, sometimes students get tripped up by this question. The very next page talks through consent. And let me talk for a minute about consent. So every person who fills out the application, whether you're a parent or a student, has to provide consent. Consent allows the Department of Education to go to the IRS website or the IRS database and pull information from your tax record. If you do not consent, it cannot be matched with the IRS information. If either the student or parent does not consent, does not provide consent here, then the student would automatically be rejected for financial aid. Consent is a requirement, and it's a requirement of each person who completes the application. So you can see that in the application, it defines consent, and it says continue, approve at the end. If you click decline, then there'll be a message pop up that will explain why that is not a good idea. So the student is asked to provide consent, and later I'll show you where the parent is asked to provide consent as well. So once you've done that, we now move into the first real section of the application called personal circumstances. And you'll see every time we start a new section, there'll be a page that looks like this that helps define what the section is and tells you what we're going to be looking at. And you can see that, in fact, Raya's section of the application, as the student, Raya has 5 sections that she's going to complete. Now, up to this point, this application is the same if I'm a 17-year-old like Raya is, or 18-year-old applying to the college for the first time, or maybe I'm a 30-something going back to get my master's degree. So far, I would have seen all the same screens just like Raya did. Or maybe I'm a parent who has kids of my own, and I'm going back to get my undergraduate degree, or my graduate degree, or my doctorate. All this application would be exactly the same. It's the same FAFSA application, no matter where you are in your lifetime, no matter where you're going back for undergraduate, graduate, or any of it. It's all the same application. So up to this point, everyone would have seen the same questions. So Raya is asked, what is her marital status? And she's going to answer single. Now, you might ask, why is this question being asked? So let me define dependent versus independent. For FAFSA, this is an important concept. If you're a dependent student, that means you rely on someone else, your parents, for support. So we're going to require your information as a student. We're also going to require your parents' information. And there are federal definitions of who qualifies as dependent. If you're independent, meaning you don't require parental support, or the government says you don't require parental information, then we don't want your parents' information. It's just going to be based on you as a student. And some examples, right? I mean, I think it's probably obvious if you're 55 and applying for financial aid, chances are we're not going to want your parents' information, right? If you're married and you have kids of your own, regardless of your age, probably obviously we don't want your parents' information. But what are the rules? So we're going to look at those rules as we go. The first one is if you're single, you're dependent, maybe. If you're something other than single, you're probably independent. So that's why this first question is here. And this first section of the form is trying to get at that question of dependence versus independence. The next page asks, what year in college will you be when you start the 24-25 school year? Will you be a first year freshman, a second year, other undergraduate, or a master's student? If you choose graduate, master's, doctorate, you're automatically independent. Otherwise, you might be a dependent student. Now, some students will have college credit when they start college. Maybe they've earned that credit from AP credit or from an ACE program, or they have an AA that they've earned while they've been enrolled in high school. They would still answer freshman if it's their first year in college, just as an FYI. The other thing that tricks students often is this question at the bottom of the page that says, when you start the 24-25 year, will you already have your first bachelor's degree? So no matter how much students think that they get a wonderful diploma at the high school graduation, it's not a bachelor's degree, it is a high school diploma. So if they've not graduated college yet, want to make sure they answer no to that question. This next page asks about a series of conditions that if you answer yes to any of them, you're automatically independent. And let's go through that list. So number one, are you in active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces? Are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? Do you have children or other dependents of your own for whom you provide more than half of their support? Were you an orphan or a ward of the court? Are you or were you in foster care? Are you a legally emancipated minor? Or are you in legal guardianship with someone other than your parents? If any of those questions are yes, then the student is considered independent and no parental information is required. Again, chances are, in most cases, you're going to be working with a student who answers none of these apply, like Raya did. But again, remember the FAFSA is available for students in all kinds of conditions. So again, if a student is an orphan or coming out of foster care or has legal guardians, then they would be considered independent. The next question asks, again, we're still looking at whether they're dependent or independent. Are you homeless or at risk of homelessness and unaccompanied? So a couple of things about this. So first of all, Raya's saying no, but if the student you're working with is either homeless and not living with their parents, or at risk of homelessness and not living with their parents, they would answer yes. If they do answer yes, there'll be a list of choices to describe how they qualify. Have they been declared homeless by a McKinney-Vento person at their high school? Are they in a shelter? Do they need to meet with a financial aid officer, or have they met with a financial aid officer to prove that they are homeless or at risk of homelessness? So again, that is an option here. If they are homeless or at risk of homelessness, then they are considered independent. Now, again, this is about the student who's unaccompanied. That is different than a family who's homeless. A family who's homeless would still require parental information. They probably would have a very small or no contribution. But if a family is homeless, then we still want parents' information. Okay. Then we've gone through all these questions. Maybe your case or your student's case doesn't fit neatly into any of those boxes, but they're still not relying on their parents. This question here gives those kinds of students or students in that situation an option to answer this question. So, do you have unusual circumstances that would prevent you from contacting your parents? Or would contacting your parents pose a threat or a risk to you? So, for example, maybe a student is left home because of abuse or neglect, or they're abandoned, or they're a victim of human trafficking, or they're incarcerated, or their parents are incarcerated. If any of these conditions are true, the student would answer yes and would have to provide information to the college or university to prove their case. But in this case, Raya answered no, and we're moving forward. So after all of those questions, Raya has been determined to be a dependent student. There's nothing that she's identified that will mark her as independent. So we're going to need information about parents as well. With that in mind, they ask a question, and this question has caused massive confusion among students. So I want to point this out to you and call your attention to it. There are times when a parent will say, I don't want to complete the form. I'm not going to complete the form. The student just is on their own. But the student doesn't qualify under any of those conditions we talked about before. So they are technically a dependent student. In that case, if the student says, my parents unwilling to file the FAFSA, they're not willing to provide any information, I'm going to click yes here, then that student can qualify for a very small, what's called unsubsidized student loan. And that's all they'll qualify for. It's about $5,500. It starts assessing interest immediately. It's not a great loan for students, but for students who have no other choice, that option is there. In most cases, students are going to answer no. No, my parents are not unwilling to provide their information, right? In other words, yes, my parents are willing to provide their information, but the no is the right response here, and they will go on for the rest of their application process. This is confusing to students. Students who answer yes to this question are saying, I can't give you my parents' information. My parents don't want to provide it. And by definition, then they've turned down most types of financial aid. So if you're working with a family and the parents are willing to provide their information, which hopefully most are, you want to click no here and move forward. If you are working with a family who says, well, I don't want to provide my information, and I've had this happen before, then I would ask some questions, right? The first question is, why not? Well, often the parent will say, because I can't afford to pay for college. Well, remember, that's what the FAFSA is for. It's to determine whether you can or can't afford it and whether, in fact, the student is eligible for financial aid. The FAFSA is not an obligation to pay anyone. It's simply an application for financial assistance. Often, when I speak to a parent or parents and explain that, they're willing to complete the application in any way. Okay, so now the last section of this part on personal circumstances is tell us a little bit about your parents. And this is where we get into marital status. So I want to just explain a little bit about parent marital status. So this first question asks, are your parents married to each other? And by parents, they mean biological or adoptive parents. And Raya says, yes, they're married to each other. Raya's a pretty simple family, so she's going to move on. But your family you're working with may be different. They may not be married to each other. Maybe they're divorced or separated or never married. What happens then? Well, if the student answers no, the next question that will show up will say, are the parents unmarried and living together? If you answer yes to that question, then information on both parents is still required. We will want information on both parents because they're married and living together. But let's say the answer is no. So, no, they're not married. No, they're not unmarried and living together. They're divorced and living apart. What happens then? The student is instructed in that situation to fill out the FAFSA with the parent who provided more financial support over the last year, over the last 12 months. Which parent paid more to provide housing and food and other support? It's not who the student lived with. It's not who claimed the student on the tax return. It's who provided more financial support. That's the question that's asked. That is the parent who will complete the FAFSA with the student. So notice again, it's not who earns more money, it's who provided more financial support for the student. If that support is equal, so let's say mom and dad have an arrangement where each pays for half of the student cost, or let's say the student's living on their own and nobody pays to support them, so there's no money coming from either mom or dad, then the FAFSA says, well, pick the parent who earns more. Which parent has the greater income and assets? So again, walking that through, it is if your parents are divorced, who provides more support to you? And if that number is equal, or zero, then it's who has the greater income. Once you pick the parent, then if that parent is remarried, so let's say student gets more support from mom and mom is remarried and now there's stepdad, well, then the application would be mom, stepdad, and student. It is that household that then completes the application once you determine which parent it is. If you have questions about this, feel free to type it in the Q&A. Again, we have our panelists who are available to answer questions for you, but those are the rules for the parent information for the FAFSA. Once you finish that section, once you do that, you then, as a student, would go on to provide information about your parents. And you can see here, the FAFSA says we need information about only one of your parents now. Let me talk about that and why that is the case. So, when it comes time to be a contributor, I said it might be either one parent or two parents, depending upon your situation. The best way to think about this is that the FAFSA is going to match to the IRS. It is going to look for information to match an IRS record. If both parents are married and filing together, filing jointly, then they have one tax record at the IRS. So as long as one of those two parents completes the FAFSA, they can pull the whole record down from the IRS because they've matched against one of the parents on that tax record. So if you are married filing jointly and your parents, only one parent has to complete the FAFSA. But if you are married filing separately or head of household or something like that, or maybe you don't file taxes, in that situation, both parents would have to have a contributor, both parents would have to do their section of the FAFSA separately. So again, to keep in mind, married filing jointly, one tax record, one contributor. But married filing separately or married but neither of them file taxes, or divorced and the student the parent chooses has a new spouse and they file separately from each other, then again it would be two records, two parents who have to complete. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. If you have questions, again, please feel free to type them in the Q&A. I see we have a couple questions coming into the chat. Just a reminder, please, to use the Q&A so that everyone can see the questions and the answers. So in this case, we know that Raya's parents are married, but Raya is inviting Alcina, her mom, to complete the form with her. Now, important information. This is, remember, the student who's putting this information in. Notice the student's asked to provide first and last name of the parent, also the parent's date of birth, and finally, and this is the one that I think will trip up most students, is the student is asked to provide their parents' social security number. Why is that? Well, remember, when they're going to invite the parents, we need to know who that parent is, and that parent's social security number is very important to make sure that it matches against the record. My guess is that most students who complete a FAFSA, though, won't know their parents' SSN. So very important when you're working with families that you reinforce that students have to have their parents' SSN to be able to type it in here. And a mistake that parents or students have made is they get to this point and they don't have a parent SSN, so they click my parent doesn't have an SSN because that they think that means I don't have my parent's SSN. That is not what that means. So just to be clear, students whose parents have an SSN need to be able to provide that SSN on the application to make sure the parent receives their invitation. Student will type in the parent's email address and click send invite, and that will generate an invitation to be sent to the parent to complete their section of the FAFSA. If a parent truly doesn't have an SSN, and that could happen, right? It could happen that maybe a parent is a foreign national, is not a U.S. citizen. It's not required as long as the student is. If legitimately the parent doesn't have an SSN, you can click that box. Then they'll be asked to provide the parent's ITIN, or individual taxpayer identification number. And if the parent doesn't have one of those, that's fine. In that situation, then the system will try to match using a credit bureau report service to make sure that we can match the identity. Okay. So that's information here about this. Once they click send invite, the invitation goes, and Raya's mom will be able to start filing her section of the form. Just a reminder again, please, if you have questions, do not put them in the chat. Please put them in the Q&A. I'm seeing questions in the chat. We need to make sure they go to the Q&A so our staff is able to answer them for you. So once you've completed those questions, that is the end of that first section of the FAFSA for the student. We move on to student demographics. The student demographics section, some of the information here is optional. So the very first question asks for the student's gender. That is an optional question, not required. So the student can choose not to answer if they don't want to. And the next question asks about the student's race and ethnicity. Again, that is also optional if the student does not want to answer. The question after that is required, and that is if the student is a US citizen or eligible non-citizen. To be able to qualify for financial assistance, a student must be either a US citizen or eligible non-citizen. What is an eligible non-citizen? This means generally a permanent resident, i.e., someone who has their green card, or it could be someone who's here on a waiver, or a asylee or refugee, someone who's come in under Ukrainian waivers or Haitian waivers, etc. If you have a question about whether a student does or does not um, qualify for eligible non-citizen, if you do a search using Google for FAFSA eligible non-citizen, you should be able to find out whether someone is or is not qualified. Next question asks about parents' educational status. Again, just a reminder here, this is not really required for federal financial aid, but it is information that's helpful for colleges if they have special programs for first generation students, or some states do. So that information is asked. The next question asks, is the parent or was the parent, student's parent, killed in the line of duty, either serving in the armed forces after 9/11 or as a public safety officer? The reason this question is asked is because there's some benefits with the Pell Grant that go to parents or surviving students whose parents were killed in the line of duty. If the answer is yes, they would answer yes and be prepared to provide information to the college about that situation. The next question asks about high school completion status. To receive federal financial aid, the student must have graduated high school or have a high school equivalency, high school diploma equivalency. So this section provides a way for the student to identify how they qualified. Did they get a high school diploma? Did they qualify using their GED? Were they homeschooled? Whatever the answer is. If you choose high school diploma, the next section will ask you to specify what high school it was the student graduated from. And this is a pretty easy search, just by the name of the high school, the location, and then a match. And there is the matching. That's it for demographics. So we're going to move to the finances section. And this will go pretty quickly because the financial information is really basic. Much of the information that comes over is coming directly over from the IRS. There are only really 3 questions that are asked about income and a couple of questions about assets. Excuse me, sorry. The 3 questions on income that are asked are the following. Number 1, and again, remember this is the same question asked to parents and students, so I'm going to review it for both, but chances are most families are going to have neither. Number 1, did you roll money over into an IRA or a pension plan? So what this means is, did you take a distribution from a retirement plan you own? Did that show up as income on your taxes? And do we need now to exclude it so we don't count it as income? Well, first of all, a couple things. This is looking at the 2022 tax information. So for the 24-25 FAFSA, it's 2022 tax information we're looking at. And number 2, most families don't have, most students certainly don't have a retirement account, and aren't, if they do, they aren't taking distributions from it. It's unlikely that parents would, but it's possible. Maybe a parent changed employers and needs to move their pension from one employer to another employer. That's the option here. So it's not counted as income. The second question asks about how much college grants or scholarships or AmeriCorps benefits you report it as income to the IRS. Again, this is highly unlikely, but it is possible that if a student has so much grant and scholarship that it's more than the amount of tuition and fees and other required charges, that grant or scholarship might have been reported as part of their income in 2022. If that's the case, we don't want to double penalize, so this allows the student to declare how much of that to ignore. The third question here asks about something called foreign earned income. And again, probably unlikely with the families you'll be working with, but just to identify what this is, if, let's say, a student or a parent is living in the US but working abroad, so let's say they're a US citizen, but they happen to be stationed in Thailand and they're working in Thailand on a project and they're being paid in Thailand. That income is earned abroad. Well, the US government allows you to eliminate that income from your taxes on the IRS form because presumably you've paid taxes abroad in Thailand on that earnings. So you're allowed to deduct it off of the amount you pay taxes on in the US. But for the purposes of financial aid, we want to add that income back because that is legitimate income that you earned. Again, most of the families you work with won't have this, but if they do, this is where they would put the amount to add it back. Other than that, all the other income informations automatically be transferred over from the IRS to the FAFSA when you link up the two. There are three asset questions which we're going to look at, and I want to highlight for you that the asset questions don't ask about the kinds of asset that most families have. Most families, their biggest asset is their home. Home is not included on the FAFSA. We don't ask about the home on the FAFSA. And the second largest asset is retirement assets, like, for example, 401k plans, 403b plans, SEP plans, those sorts of retirement, specifically designated retirement accounts. Those do not get reported on the FAFSA. What is reported? Well, what's reported is for the student, and again for the parent as well, their total of cash, savings, and checking accounts. So for the student, Raya has $500. If the student owns a business or has an investment farm, not a farm that they live on, but an investment farm, a farm they invest in, then they would report the value of the asset, the net worth of the asset in those business or farm. And this is true again for parents or students. In this case, it's zero for Raya. And then the third type here is other investments, including, for example, second properties, maybe a real estate investment, or other stocks or bonds that are not in the retirement program or not in the retirement asset, but are held separately. Again, any net value would be reported there. Raya has said all she has is $500 in cash and zero on those others. So we're almost done with Raya's section of the application. All that's left is for her to select her colleges and for her to sign and submit the form. So in the selecting colleges section, she's going to choose the colleges she wants to send the application to. Couple of notes. You can list up to 20 colleges on the FAFSA. When you do the FAFSA, you can list again up to 20 schools. And you want to choose schools that, even if the student hasn't necessarily been admitted yet, or hasn't even applied yet, there's no reason to wait. You can go ahead and submit the FAFSA, even if the student hasn't completed an application for admission, hasn't been accepted. Go ahead and get the FAFSA done, so at least it's there at the school for them to match it when the student is then an applicant and does get admitted. So you can look up the school a couple of different ways. You can look them up by the name of the school and location, or every school has a school code, a 6-digit school code provided by the Department of Education. If you find out that school code from the school, they can tell you what that is. You can find them and look them up that way as well. And you can see some examples here of their school codes. Once you add them to the form, right, in this case, she's got 5 colleges, 4 so far that she's selected. You then come to a summary page, and some students make a mistake here and think, I'm done, and they close their browser. Note, by the way, that it says, take a moment to review before signing, and the signature section is the piece that is missing. Students have to sign the form before they're considered complete. And you can see here, this is just a summary, allowing the student to review what they've provided and correct anything that might be incorrect. It also shows you that you've invited a contributor to do their section, and they've not done any section of their form yet. Then you're told to sign and submit the form by clicking the box, by clicking the blue sign button. They've now completed their section of the form, and you'll see the student section is complete. You'll get a success message that shows you the student section is done, but the parent section is not yet done, and it tells you what to do next. Now, if you're a parent, if you're Raya's parent, you're going to get an email that looks much like this that says, hey, Raya's invited you to complete her application and to start doing her section or the application for her, and click on this blue button to get started. So Raya's mom will have gotten an email from studentaid.gov that says, here's how to do her section of the form. Once she clicks on that, she'll be taken to a login page. Again, Raya's mom will be. And again, this login page looks much the same. It's just the username and password. But because she's a parent and she clicked on that invitation, it will know that she's coming in as a contributor to Raya's form. So she can accept the invitation that Raya has sent her to complete her section of the form. And once she clicks continue to authorize, it's going to go through just identifying what does this mean? Why am I a contributor? Does it mean I'm responsible for paying for college? No. Why do I need to complete my section? Etc. And then you're going to see much the same like we just went through. So the first four screens are the same videos, this time really presented to Raya's mom so she can view them. And as we saw before, for Raya, here's a confirmation of the information that we have on file or the Department of Education has on file, and Raya's mom can click continue. Raya's mom is then, Alcina is her name, is then presented with information to confirm that she is providing consent. So just like Raya had to provide consent, Alcina has to provide consent. And we move now to parent demographics. So this is going to move rather quickly because much of this is going to be very similar to what we saw before. You can also see that Raya's mom only has 3 sections of the form rather than 5. Remember, Raya had 5 sections. So the very first question asks Raya's mom to declare what is her marital status. Raya's mom is married, not separated. So she puts that information in there. Raya's mom is asked about her state of legal residence, and we talked about this before. So she's going to say the New York and the date of the older of the two parents in terms of, or the longer of the two parents living in New York. And that's it for demographics. We now move to finances for the parent. And there are a couple of new questions, but most of these are almost exactly the same. The first page asks, did Raya's parents receive any federal benefits? And that includes things like housing assistance, Medicaid, CHIP, SNAP, SSI, etc., TANF. The reason it's asking about these programs is because if you qualify for any of them, you may qualify for something called a simple needs test, which means that we get to skip your assets. So it's just asking if you qualify for any of these. Raya's parents do not, so they answered none of the above and move forward. But if you're working with a family that does, you click the particular benefit or benefits that apply to them. This next question asks a couple of questions about taxes, and these questions are important. Number one, did you file a 2022 IRS Form 1040 or 1040 non-resident? So Raya's parents say, yes, we have a tax record. They can move on. But let's say the family you're working with says, no, I didn't file a return. The next question would ask, well, is that because you didn't earn enough money? Or did you file a foreign tax return or a Puerto Rican tax return? It asks to provide some clarity around why you don't have an IRS record. In Raya's case, she said yes. The next question says, did or will a parent file a joint tax return with their current spouse? So why is it asking this question? Well, think about the possibility that it's been a couple of years since 2022. It's possible that there may have been a divorce since then, or maybe one parent passed away and the parent is now widowed. In that situation, if you were to click no here, the FAFSA would ask you to enter by hand the tax information for that parent because they can't match against a record where there isn't the same parent information for both. So that's why it's asking you to confirm. But in most situations, the answer is going to be yes here, and you can move on. If it's not, click no. In other words, if your 2022 form was filed with someone who now you're no longer married to, click no, and it will give you the option to answer the questions manually. The next question asks about family size. If the family size is different than what's on the tax return. And in Raya's case, it is. So in Raya's case, they had 3 people on the tax return, and they have had a baby since they filed the taxes. So in her situation, because that baby was not on the tax return, was born, let's say in 2023, they're going to provide an additional person here so that the family size is now 4 rather than 3. But in many cases, if your family size is the same, you just click no and can move on. This question asks about how many people in the family are going to college. That's just for information. If the number is greater than 1, you'd provide that, but in this case, it's just simply 1. And now we get to the actual tax information. And again, much like the last time we saw it on Raya's page, we've got pension rollover, we've got the college grants question, we've got foreign income and earned exclusion question. There is an additional question that says, did the parent receive the earned income tax credit? That's a particular kind of credit that shows up on the IRS form if a parent does earn it. And it is a refundable tax credit against taxes owed. If you have it, you would know that. If you're not sure, if you click on the little gray I box, that will show the parent where to look on the tax return to see if they do or do not have the earned income credit. Parents asked about their assets. In Raya's case, mom says, I have 10,000 in my, 10,000 in my bank account. I have 5,000 in other investments. But the one question that's new here that we haven't seen before in Raya's section is annual child support received. If Raya's mom received child support, got child support from another parent, they would report here the amount of the child support they received during the last complete calendar year. Because we're filling out the form right now in 2024, that last complete calendar year would be 2023. That would be the information you'd provide if you indeed had child support. Raya's parents do not. Last, Raya's mom is asked to provide information about her husband. And just in case there's a need to contact him, she then is asked to review and sign her section and her form. And again, just like with Raya, she can't close the browser until she clicks agree, sign, and submit. And once she does that, she will get a note saying, congratulations, the FAFSA form has been completed. And Raya will get an email that says, congratulations, your FAFSA form has been completed. That email is very important because that's the proof you're going to need to submit to show that you've worked with the family to complete their FAFSA. We're going to ask you to collect that email and submit that to us as proof of completion. And what I want to show you is I want to show you where you're going to do that. So again, we will send this to you in an email tomorrow or Monday. You'll get a copy of the recording from our event today. We've got a link to the form I'm about to show you and information about this webpage. So many of you, all of you, came in on FAFSAadvising.com and signed up for today's webinar. At the bottom of the page, you may have missed this, there's a link to the actual PowerPoint that we've used. So if you click on that link, you go to the webpage, there's a PDF version or a PowerPoint version where you can walk through all the slides that we've walked through today. So again, go to the FAFSA advising page, go all the way down to the bottom, and here you can see where you can reach us directly or reach out directly to get a copy of the PowerPoint that we've used today in case you want to use that when you talk to families or have it as a reference point for you. It's available there. Secondly, when it's time to submit your application or your information, this is the Google form you will use, and we'll send this to you. We will also update to say that it's 5 submissions for $250. But basically, you will put in your email address, you'll have your name, your email address, your mailing address, your phone number, what organization you work with, and you can upload up to 10 screenshots of that confirmation email that says, "Congratulations, you've completed your FAFSA." The confirmation email will basically have this message. So it will say, "We've received your FAFSA. Here's your submission date. Here's your DRN. Here's your estimated student index." So once you have those emails, if you submit them using this form, you will receive the payment from us. So a couple of pieces of information about this. So while FAFSAs can be completed up until next June, so if you could do a FAFSA today, you can do a FAFSA tomorrow. You can actually do a FAFSA in January for this current year. You can do the FAFSA form for this current academic year all the way through next June 30th. So that is when the FAFSA closes. Our project, however, closes in the middle of August. So if you want a chance to, again, be compensated with this stipend, you have to get your information in by the middle of August. So it's important that you reach out to families now, working with them now. The reason for that is the federal government really is trying to support and promote application completions this summer. So that is why our project has a limited time window. We're really focused on applications completed this summer. So I'm going to answer. There are a couple of questions that I see both in the chat as well as on the Q&A. So I want to provide those answers. Number one, if you start your FAFSA application and you want to step away, you don't have to do it all at once. You can save in the middle and come back to it later. But you want to make sure that, again, you have a chance to come back and finish that application. So there is a question in the chat. Can we, or in the Q&A, can we include 2025 seniors and adults transitioning? How long will processing take for a student to receive their Amazon gift card? Could our organization contract with your organization to complete this project at a larger scale beyond August? So please reach out to me about that piece. We can talk about how we might partner together. Um, but yes, we actually, it's really important to understand that the project we're working on right now, the one that's funded by the federal government, has to wrap up by the middle or end of August. So that's why we're focused on this August, next month, to try to wrap this project up. It's a short window of time. The funding we received is specifically to encourage FAFSA completion this summer. We'd be happy through Bridge to Life to connect with you to talk about other possibilities and other opportunities for later years or for next year. But again, right now we're focused on this particular year and this particular set. I also saw there were some questions. Let's see. If a widow is remarried and files separate taxes, how will you file? I presume what that means is, let's say the widow, it depends on when the widow remarried. So if the widow remarried before 2022, when they file the taxes jointly, that one parent will be a contributor. That one parent record will pull both parents' information down, and that will connect. But let's say a parent was widowed in 2022 and got remarried in 2023. What happens then? Right? In that situation, if the parent actually was widowed in 2022, when they get to that section of the application where they indicate, are you filing it, or did you file the tax return with your current spouse? They would say no, and the parent would be told to only put the amount of income relative to them by hand on the application form. If you do have questions, you can feel free to reach me directly, and I'm happy to provide more information. I will share with you a couple of things. First of all, we have an email address at fafsaeducate@gmail.com. Also, and I'll type this into the chat, you can feel free to reach out to me if you have questions after today, or if you're working with a family and need some help with a particular circumstance. My email address, whoops, I take that back. Let me delete that. I mistyped. It is dbarkowitz@gmail.com. So again, DBAR KOWITZ, Barkowitz, at gmail.com. You can feel free to reach out to me there, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have after today. Now, I did promise we'd be done by 3:15. It is 3:11 Eastern Time, so I want to respect that time and give you some time back. If you have any other questions, though, we are still here. We're happy to answer them for you. Um, and feel free to reach back to us if you have additional questions after today. Again, we will send you a copy of the recording, a copy of the link to the form for submission, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach back to us. We're happy to answer them. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time today. Appreciate your attention. Have a great rest of your Saturday. And we look forward to receiving submissions from you. We'd love this to be a great success and to try to help, again, make a difference for um, for all parents and students who are looking to complete their FAFSA. Dion, if you are looking for the presentation, it's on our website, which is fafsaadvising.com, or I'm showing it to you here at Proud Bridge to Life / FAFSA Advising. On the bottom of the page, you'll see the link to the FAFSA walkthrough presentation right here. So again, the direct website, I'll type in the chat, but it's fafsaadvising.com. Thank you all very, very much. Have a great rest of your day. Take good care.